So one of the questions, and I've been talking a lot to one of my close friends about this of late. Anytime that, say, in like ancient writing, like you talk about the Bible or anything, when people talk about like angels or demons appearing to them, then there's always been this suggestion that possibly it's aliens or it's interdimensional beings, and this was like a thing that was, I don't know, it was sort of, it's talked about, but maybe not like considered to be like the most mainstream view of what people were talking about then. But I think it's probably quite possible that lights and things like this have appeared, and that's how it was described by people who yeah, don't have another frame of reference. But like my question is always, is like, do you think these are angels or are they demons?
Well, both, I think, is the answer. But I mean, all of what we see is interpreted by us based on our cultural and religious upbringing. Um, because this phenomena has been with us, I think, since the beginning. I think that the Kesem cave people were seeing lights in connection with this mountain, which is one of the reasons why they were attracted to it. There are mountains all over the world where mysterious lights are seen. I visited them in China, in Greece, places like Mount Athos, in California, Mount Shasta, many other places, and it's all the same. They are places where mysterious lights, what we call UFOs or UAPs is the term that the US military and government seem to want to call them today, which means, the unidentified aerial phenomena. They all produce these lights. And at the same time, people visit them and they have transformative experiences. They find themselves in communication with intelligences. They make that connection. And I think that this is something that happened as early as 400,000 years ago in Israel at the Kesem cave, that the people there went to Mount Gerizim. They saw these lights, connected with them in some manner, and then felt that they should continue these communications, and that their shamanism, part of that was to communicate with however they perceived the intelligences associated with them, whether they saw it as an entity, a deity or whatever. And I think that what we should remember here is that the Israelites came to conclude that these lights were visible manifestations of Yahweh himself. In other words, this was the foundation point in many ways of the worship of God, the God that eventually becomes the God of the Christians. So in other words, Eric von Daniken's idea of was God an astronaut in some ways was sort of correct, in the sense that God may well certainly be associated with mysterious light phenomena, light forms, which then begs the question of what are they? Can we try and define what they are? And I think that the key here is that I'm going to say as much as 70% of these UFOs, let's call them that for the moment, are essentially lights, objects of light, glowing objects of light, whether they be big, small, clusters of lights, appear to have structure, whatever. That's what they are. Now, what is light? Obviously at the beginning of the Bible, it says, let there be light. What is light? Well, light is photons. But more importantly is that many UFOs, and this goes back, decades, people started to realize that they were appearing only, when I say only, more frequently at certain locations more than any others. And very early, people started to think that, these UFOs could manifest there because of something special to do with the landscape involved. And people did even start to suggest things like maybe it's to do with magnetism or something like this. But it wasn't really until the early 1980s that people started to really work out what was going on. And that was the fact that the areas where UFOs most frequently occur, which we today call portals, that's the modern term that's used, have very intense geologies. And this is a geology that usually involves tectonic stress going on deep down in the earth. pressure on tectonic, not just the tectonic plates, but also fault lines, and different types of rock which, when put under pressure, will produce electricity. In other words, flows of electrons, going from higher to lower potential. And again, this doesn't sound very, exciting, but what happens is that these electrons, of which we are dealing with, countless amounts of them, rise up from the ground into the local environment and create what is scientifically known as electron bursts. This in turn produced something called ionospheric conditions. And when this occurs, what happens is that plasma manifests. Now, what is plasma? Plasma is the fourth state of matter. We all know about solids, we all know about liquids, we all know about gases, but the fourth state of matter is plasma, and this is created when electrons start splitting away from atoms. And this is exactly what happens in these environments. And when they split away, they get very excited, that's the term that's used, and they start bashing into other atoms, forcing them to free their electrons, and it becomes a chain reaction. At the same time, they generate electromagnetic fields around them, and suddenly, boom, it's like switching on a light bulb. There's an object of light. And the reason that it's a light is because these electrons, when they're excited, produce photons. They release photons of energy. So suddenly you have objects of light in front of you. Now, again, this is something that's been known to science for, well, certainly probably for 200 or 300 years, that if you create certain stresses and strains in the earth, it will produce light. Often they're seen before earthquakes. I mean, this is an accepted phenomena, but it seems that you can take it one step further to say that the environments in which UFOs appear, and I say not all, we're not talking about everyone, we're not talking about flying saucers from another planet here, we're talking about most objects that are interpreted as UFOs can manifest within these environments, and that most of them will be plasma. Plasma can be invisible, by the way. It can be solid, it can be picked up on radar, but most important, and by the way, plasma is the light of the sun, for instance. It is it's produced by black holes, neutron stars. It creates lightning. That's what lightning is, plasma. Ball lightning is plasma. And what happens is, this is the important bit, is that it was long noticed ago that plasma seems to come alive as if it has sentience or intelligence. And this is not just in scientific experimentation, but also out there when these objects appear. They seem to have a sentience. They seem to have a connection with anybody that seems to observe and interact with them. And this is something that you find again and again with people that have UFO encounters, that there is a relationship built up between them and the object whilst it's there, and they feel they know who, this object. They feel that they connect with it as if they've known it all their life, and will then spend most of the remainder of their life trying to reconnect with it or sustain that connection. I mean, this is something that I've seen again and again with UFO witnesses. Now, that's going to be a little bit more difficult to explain, other than the fact that I genuinely believe that we are dealing with a sentience here, a sentience that somehow comes in to occupy plasma environments once they exist. In other words, what we call UFOs could actually be alive. They could actually be the entity. They could be the being. And again, nothing new. I mean, people like, there was a guy called Trevor James Constable that came up with these ideas back in, I think, the 60s, books that came out in the 70s, Cosmic Pulse of Life. He believed that UFOs were themselves, life forms that existed in the upper atmosphere. But, we're refining it and linking it now very specifically with science, because there was a theoretical physicist by the name of David Bowen. He came across to here from America, spent most of his time doing experimental work places like Bristol University. And he studied plasma. He also came to the conclusion that it was alive and that some kind of intelligence could inhabit plasma environments. And he believed that these intelligences were coming up from what he referred to as a deeper level of existence, something that was outside of space-time, some kind of what would be referred to in science as a non-local medium. In other words, it's outside of the air and space that we deal with on a general basis. And he came to call this deeper level of existence the implicate order. He believed that it was behind creation in the universe, but his colleague Basil Hiley referred to this same realm as the pre-space. In other words, that which is beyond the space that we know. And this seems to be where these intelligences come from. Now, what does that mean? Where do they come from? Where do they exist? Where do they go? Well, this is the interesting fact, is that plasma recently has been hypothesized by various theoretical physicists has an extra dimension of space within it. In other words, the world that we live in all the time has 3 dimensions of space and one of time. Time obviously moving in one direction, forward. But plasma could well have an extra dimension of space. There's good reasons for this, very, very good reasons. I go into all of this in the book. But if that's correct, then it starts linking us with theories that are suggesting that there are higher dimensional realms that coexist with us. The best theory of that right now is what's known as M theory, which is an area of string theory which has taken it onto a new level, really. It was created in the mid-1990s by a physicist by the name of Ed Witten. And what this suggests is that before the Big Bang, before our universe was created, there was a realm that existed known as the bulk, B-U-L-K, the bulk. And this was an 11-dimensional environment. And of those 11 dimensions, 6 of them are what's known as compactified, which means they're scrunched up in very, very tiny balls, and you wouldn't even notice that they were there. Now, on top of that, you have 4 dimensions of space and 1 of time, although the time dimension wouldn't necessarily be the same as our time. Almost certainly, it wouldn't just move forward. It would be all time altogether, basically. In other words, there would be the ability to access any part of it at any time. Now, if plasma does act as a conduit or a medium into this higher dimensional realm, which, sorry, I've forgotten a bit. Let's get into the creation of the universe. It's believed that our universe has blown up like a bubble inside the bulk, and that this is created possibly by what they refer to as white holes, which are the opposite of black holes, that produce plasma that quickly becomes atomic matter or nuclear matter and blows up and expands outwards to create the physical universe in which we live with its own laws of physics. But it's also believed that there are other of these universes. The term they use for them is branes, B-R-A-N-E, or brain worlds. And that these brain worlds, of which, our universe is one, there could be many of them. And each of them with their own laws of physics. But it's possible also, it's been predicted, that they may actually touch each other. In other words, they may, come together, or they may even overlay each other, or they may overlay each other temporarily, like come together and go apart, come apart, whatever. Now, all of this is therefore suggesting that we exist within a 11-dimensional environment, but we're only ever aware of the 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, and that plasma itself could be a conduit back into this 11-dimensional realm. And if that's the case, and that's where these intelligences come from, then is it possible that we are dealing with transdimensional intelligences, transdimensional consciousness the term we like to use is n-dimensional beings, or n beings for short, with the n standing for number. And the reason why it's just number is because we don't know exactly how many dimensions might be involved. It could be 4, could be 5, could be 11, although some theories suggest there could be 22 dimensions or even 32 or more. So n for number. In other words, all we can say is that we're dealing with higher dimensional intelligences here. And if that's the case, we don't stand a hope of truly perceiving them or understanding them, because, with 3 dimensions, if you just had 2 dimensions, you would live in a flat world, flatlander, to borrow a term, and everybody would be flat. And if you tried to put a 3-dimensional object, like a ball, for instance, through their flatland, all they would see is a circle opening up until it reached the full size of the ball. And as the ball passed through, that circle would gradually close up until there would be nothing there. So all they would see of a ball is a circle. And it's, in other words, they would never be able to perceive a 3-dimensional reality. It's the same for us. We're 3-dimensional creatures in space, that is. We would never be able to perceive a 4-dimensional being or a 4-dimensional object. I mean, we can try and construct it using geometry, but that is simply in a 3-dimensional plane. We cannot take it beyond that. We cannot truly see what's out there in a higher dimensional state. We could see something. And I think that if we look at UFOs, for instance, and the occupants, the light beings, whatever it is that you see as coming from them, we're seeing something and we're interpreting it in terms of aliens coming down from another world. But that's us. That is the product of our technological age since, the atomic bomb of the Second World War and Roswell, in 1947. And, all of this has meant that we perceive all UFOs as extraterrestrial spacecraft made of nuts and bolts. And this has to stop, in all honesty, because I think if we carry on this way, we would never going to truly understand this UFO phenomena, particularly as we're getting to a very crucial time in our understanding of it, where you've got these incredible US Navy videos that have been released in recent years that have been authenticated.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.